Well, one of my favorite chants, and I repeat it here just to underline how difficult this is. One of my favorite chants there in Arabic goes "Irhal bay am khalli andak dam," which is so slangy and so brilliant that I sort of translated it as "Leave already, dude. Have some shame." But that doesn't. It's so unsatisfying. If you know how funny that chant is. And so much, the signs, it really defied translation. I feel like one of my greatest challenges during the revolution was just conveying the essence of how clever these people were. I remember a middle-aged man who decided to show up every day wearing a referee's uniform and waving a red card to symbolize that Mubarak and his regime had been ejected from the game. One clever youth summed things up with a simple sign that pleaded, "Just leave already, my arm hurts." One day, Tariq Shalabi met a man holding an anti-Mubarak sign upside down. He informed the man of his apparent mistake and was told with a grin, "Well, I've been holding it right side up for a week, and Mubarak still didn't understand, so I thought I'd try this instead." Now, it really, the spirit of Egyptians, I really think that when they took over Tahrir, a genie came out of the bottle. And it hasn't gone 100% well since then. Obviously, there have been some obstacles. I think Egyptians are acutely aware of the fact that the Tunisian post-revolutionary transition is going a lot better than theirs. And they're not happy about that. Tunisian-Egyptian sort of intra-Arab fraternal rivalry may have been one of the things that fueled the revolution in the first place. There really was a period after Ben Ali was sent off into exile on about, I believe it was January 11th. There was a 2-week period, and the mood in Egypt, there was more than a bit of intra-Arab competitiveness to the Egyptian revolution. There really was this feeling, and that Egyptians genuinely do feel that they are kind of the sun around which the rest of the Middle East revolves. There's a bit of a cultural arrogance there, and some of it is deserved and some of it isn't. But the fact that the Tunisians of all people had succeeded where we had not had the guts to succeed bothered people, and it really stoked them up. So they look at Tunisia now and wonder why it's going differently, and one of the differences is the military, is the SCAF. The Tunisian military, I've not spent time in Tunisia, but I was very curious about the differences and really researched this. The Tunisian army is just an army. It's a reasonably modest affair that is designed to defend Tunisia against whatever external threats Tunisia has. It is not this economic monolith that they don't have as much to protect. And so they went back to their barracks. After Ben Ali left, they went back to their barracks and let the civilians hash it out for themselves, which they did with varying degrees of success. If you'll recall, the very first post-Ben Ali government crashed and burned because it had too many remnants from Ben Ali's government. And the people took to the streets again and said, no, bring us something different. And it was messy, but it worked. There wasn't this warping element of the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces trying to hold executive power and kind of, the word I keep using is warping. Just their presence, even regardless of their intentions, and I severely doubt their intentions. Now we're talking about whether or not the Muslim Brotherhood is going to cut a deal with the military. The fact that they're even there to cut a deal with is just twisting the entire post-revolutionary situation. Now, I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A, so I just wanted to give a very quick little laundry list of reasons for optimism and reasons for pessimism going forward. And, just to end with the good news, I'll start with the pessimism. I had to write a quick, I was asked to write a quick blog post for the Washington Post on the theme of 5 ways the revolution could fail. And one of them that I identified, I called it Red State, Blue State, which is sort of what's happening in Egypt, in that the splintering of the country along activist lines as far as the activist community wants to continue pushing, wants to continue with the street action, wants to continue confronting the military, while a lot of the country, with the military and a compliant state media doing a very effective job of selling this, have started to view them as saboteurs almost, as fanatics, perhaps well-meaning fanatics, but nonetheless dangerous fanatics who are halting the country's transition, who are standing in the way of stability. And it's a shame. But at the same time, the activists, those who are still taking to the streets, are completely fine with being in the minority. They are well aware of this. They're not deluded at all about this. They actually think they were in the minority a year ago. And the rest of the country just kind of sat at home fearfully, waiting to see who was going to win, and then said hooray for the revolution afterwards. And they truly believe, and I cannot blame them for thinking this, that the only thing that has forced any kind of positive concessions out of the military has been street action, and more specifically, street violence. And they're correct in that. If you can sit down with a calendar and point to outburst of street violence, concession from the SCAF. Outburst of street violence, concession from the SCAF. And very little has come without the violence. And I blame the SCAF for this. I blame the SCAF for the enduring stubbornness of the activists. As I said, the November and December clashes were hugely unpopular around the country. And lost in a lot of the chatter around that was that they produced a massive concession. In that up until then, the military had not set a date for the presidential election and was pushing this insane plan that would have them holding executive power through early 2013. In the wake of that violence, they set a date for the presidential election, moved it up to June of this year, and said, we will leave after the presidential elections. They have made a commitment that we can now hold them to. That is the result of these highly unpopular street actions. Another reason for pessimism is something I touched on briefly earlier, is this failure of what I'm calling the internal revolution, the revolution in social mores, the revolution in interpersonal behavior that really does need to happen. I mean, I'm proud of my fellow Egyptians, but we indulge in a whole host of really negative behaviors that cannot entirely be blamed on the long-term effect of living under Mubarak. Some of it can. Some of it can. I do think that Mubarak had a corrosive effect on Egyptian psychology and society, and I started to see that over the 15 years that I lived there, the way that people dealt with each other. Simply living in a society where there were no independent, trusted, unco-opted national institutions or arbiters. If you had any kind of a personal dispute or an economic dispute, or you broke up with your fiancé and you wanted your jewelry back, or something like you wanted the gift back, whatever, there was never a case of going to small claims court or going to a police officer. What was the point of that? It immediately became this battle of wasta, of connections, influence. And it was just a matter of whether your wasta could trump the other person's wasta. And that's all. There was never a consideration given to right or wrong. And I blame that on the long-term effects of living under Mubarak. But beyond that, just everything from sexual harassment to rampant corruption to littering. I mean, I'm raised in the States, and the way that Egyptians treat their cities and their communities makes me crazy. But that's because I came out of 20 years of training here. I was raised on Woodsy the Owl commercials and that commercial from the 70s of the Native American chief with the tear rolling down his cheek as he sees roadside litter. That stuff, there's a reason I remember these things, because it's powerful. It was imprinting. And maybe it'll take 20 years in Egypt. But the fact, and it comes down to a lack of ownership. It comes down to a lack of a sense of ownership. You don't do that in a place where you feel a sense of ownership, and you don't do that in a place where there's proper enforcement and you might get a ticket.